like I told you last week, I was going to explain why uh, the message that we preach is not universalism or ultimate reconciliation or preterism, even though people actually lump us in one of those groups often to try to explain, oh, that's what they're about. Um, we agree with many things that all three of them say, and but we disagree with a lot of them too. So I'm just trying to let you know where we disagree, and this week I'm going to tell you about ultimate reconciliation and where we disagree with them. Last week I was talking about universalism, which is really a broad umbrella because a lot of ultimate reconciliation people, universalists, consider them in their umbrella because they do have so many people who have different takes. The only common denominator for them that can make, and they would consider us under their umbrella as well, because in the end we all believe that all will be with God, or in some people's minds in heaven. But I found something on the internet because I looked at different descriptions of what ultimate reconciliation is, what their doctrines are. I found some very long things, and I finally found some guy who kind of just summarizes it very briefly, and his summary reflects pretty much the core message of ultimate reconciliation. So I'm just going to read this to you, and I'll comment. Um, this is not a Unitarian Universalism. This is a belief of born-again Christians that God's plan is ultimate reconciliation of all persons via the universal atonement of Jesus Christ. This is actually very similar to Rob Bell, what he was describing in the book Love Wins. It falls in line very, very much with this line of thinking. His book does, that is. So he says that it is a belief of born-again Christians that God's plan is the ultimate reconciliation of all people. And then he says, i.e., God will bring all to saving faith and regeneration by divine grace and sovereignty, and ultimate reconciliation of all people and the whole world has always been God's plan. And it is the manifest power of the cross of Jesus Christ. Which is really funny because it's kind of contradictory. They really don't give the work of the cross much credit for any kind of redemption or reconciliation. He says it is the power of the cross, but then he actually contradicts that in his very next paragraph. He says, according to this view, hell is not eternal. The lake of fire purges and is ultimately redemptive. He is actually saying that, okay, the cross, that redeems the born-again Christians he talks about because this is a belief of theirs. But for anybody who's not a born-again Christian, they will spend a time in hell, and the lake of fire purges and is ultimately redemptive. So Jesus' work on the cross is not the redemptive power for the people who weren't born-again Christians during this life, or people who call themselves that. It's the fire of hell, and so they have two types of redemption basically, and don't even understand it. They don't understand, they're contradicting themselves. Ultimate reconciliation is in contrast to annihilation or eternal torment in hell positions, but biblical relying on Jesus Christ and saving faith by grace in Jesus Christ relies on God's sovereign will. Now that first sentence that says that it's biblical relying on, which is not grammatically correct, biblically relying on Jesus Christ and saving faith by grace in Jesus Christ. Next sentence, it's in parentheses, contradicts that very first sentence I just read you. Relies on God's sovereign will, plan, love, and power to redeem and reconcile all through his plan to send Jesus Christ. And then he further contradicts that by saying Sorry if this explanation is long. I think there's some confusion about the position theologically, confused with Unitarianism, but very different. Ultimate second reconciliation, relies on salvation through Jesus Christ and God's sovereign grace and plan alone. So here he's saying it relies totally on God's plan, His grace, and it relies on Jesus Christ alone. And then he also says, through His reconcile all through His plan to send Jesus Christ. But prior to that, he says you have to have faith in Jesus Christ. That's one disagreement that we have, because you didn't have to have faith in Adam to be imputed with sin, original sin, born with original sin. But you do have to have faith in Jesus to reverse that problem of sin. So that's where we differ, because just as much as we were in Adam, whether we believed Adam's sin was imputed to us or not, we were also in the last Adam, Jesus Christ, and made righteous, whether we believed in Jesus Christ or not. Same for same. It's a tit for tat, same deal. Not only that, they believe this is future tense. They don't really believe much in the work of the cross having done anything then and there, and that's where we say all of this happened. And Paul even says it in 2 Corinthians 5:18. He says, "And all things are of God, who hath reconciled," past tense, "us to Himself by Jesus Christ." It was at the cross. Further, in Romans 5, verse 10, he says again, "For if we, when we were enemies," so we were enemies. We didn't have to have any of that enmity that was within us against God. We didn't have to have that purged. According to Paul, it says, "For when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of His Son." Not by a future purging after we die. It was already done. See, everything, just like the Universalists, and just like, and these are the same as the Universalists in that respect. They think this is all going to happen eventually someday. They take away so much of the power of the cross by attributing it to still something that God has to do, and we still need something done for us. That blood wasn't enough, and that whole sacrifice wasn't enough. God becoming man and rising from the dead, that's when Adam says we all rise. So it's past tense. And then he contradicts himself again and says it relies on God alone. So they're kind of all over the board. I like the fact that at least they don't believe in eternal torment, but they believe in some torment. Hell is not eternal, but it's still torment. So that, but it gives you some hope. At least you can walk around in this life, which is one of the beauties of the gospel. You walk around in this life, and you know after this life, everybody who's here now will be with God, and you will be with them and with God as well. That's a nice thought. Instead of walking around this world with an us and them mentality that, no, they're not saved, they're going to hell, and it causes you to completely treat that other person differently. You'll either try to get them saved, or you won't be so invested in them. It's just not a cool thing. So at least with ultimate reconciliation and universalism and the full preterists, which I'll talk about next week, at least they all feel that there's no future judgment coming, even though there's some purging and torment. But at least they can view the world as, hey, we're all in this, and we're all going to be together for eternity, which is a better way to look at your fellow man. Our message is definitely much more than that. That's just part of our message. But if we could get just that part out to the whole world, the world would treat each other differently, and all the quote-unquote evils that people perceive in the world, they would diminish drastically, because people would start treating each other better. Anyway, that was the differing aspects of the gospel versus ultimate redemption. Have a good weekend.